This is the new Toyota Prius Prime plug-in hybrid. So I guess the Prius looks cool now? And it's got more electric range than before. This base model SE can do 44 miles on electric power, and it has nearly 100 horsepower more than before. Today we'll take a close look at this super efficient, sensibly sized, pretty rad-looking plug-in hybrid. We'll talk about how it drives, efficiency, safety, things we like and things we don't like, and why a plug-in hybrid may be a better choice than a fully electric vehicle. But first, a Prius Prime montage. So there are many reasons why you might want to burn less gasoline. Maybe you actually care about the environment. Maybe you're concerned about energy independence. Maybe you just want to spend less money to get around. Whatever the reason, the Prius has long been a great way to achieve this. And this new Prius Prime goes above and beyond in terms of efficiency. This base model SE can now do up to 44 miles on EV power only. Now here's an interesting set of facts. The average American drives fewer than 40 miles per day. 52% of all trips are less than 3 miles, 28% of trips are less than 1 mile. So that many sub 1 mile trips certainly seems to indicate a larger problem with car dependency in the US, but I won't get into that in this video. But the point here is that this Prius Prime can handle most daily driving activities of the average American without ever burning a drop of gasoline. And because it's not lugging around a huge battery, it has the potential to do it more efficiently than a fully electric vehicle. Okay, so here's the quick takeaways. The cheapest non-plug-in Prius starts at around 29 grand. When it comes to the plug-in Prius Prime range, we've got 3 models to choose from. This is the base model SE, and it starts at just over 34,000. And you can get well into the 40s with the XSE Premium Plus options. But I'm really glad we have the base model here because I think this is the one that I'd go with. Sure, you don't get heated seats or a power liftgate with this base model Prime, but it's actually the most efficient Prius with the best EV range. We'll talk about that a bit more when we drive it. And it looks pretty good too. My wife owns a 2016 Prius, and yeah, we didn't buy that car for the looks. It's frumpy, it's awkward, it's weird. This new one here has a lot more futuristic elegance going on. It legitimately looks good. For a long time, I wondered if Toyota was purposely making their efficient cars ugly so it would convince people to buy less efficient SUVs. I mean, look at the last generation Mirai. One thing that's hard to not miss is this insanely raked windshield. It's almost like there's a straight line from the hood all the way to the roof. It is a bit over the top, and it does make this new Prius a touch harder to see out of than the previous one, but more on that in a bit. And thank goodness, Toyota finally sent me a press car that's not gray. We've got this nice dark blue here. It is a pretty conservative plain color, but it's better than gray. So down here we've got 17-inch alloy wheels, but they are hidden by these dark gray aerodynamic wheel covers, and I think they look pretty cool. You can of course get larger wheels on the higher trims, but this seems like it's the sweet spot. On the driver's side, we've got the fuel door, and on the passenger side, you've got that EV charging port, which you can just open with a push. And when you look closely at the design, you'll find a few little Easter eggs here and there. You got a little tiny Prius logo here on the window trim, and one right here on the rear defroster. Up here, there's text that says Hybrid Reborn. That's a bit cheesy, but I guess it's cool that there's a little Easter egg here. There's also one inside the engine bay. Okay, so before we drive it, let's take a close look at the interior features and design. Okay, so here we are in this base model Prius Prime SE, and I'm really glad we have this base model because manufacturers often only send top trims with all of the bells and whistles. It's great to be able to test out this less expensive SE. Maybe we'll find that we don't really need all those extra features. In general, this design is very clean, it's very functional. It has actual physical controls for some functions, which I appreciate, and this really nice sort of copperish trim piece on the dashboard. There's not that much glossy black plastic in here, just a little bit around here, and then a little bit up here by the infotainment. This gloss black usually gets dirty and dusty pretty quickly, so I appreciate when they don't use a whole lot of it. So while this will not give you the impression that you're in any sort of luxury vehicle, it is really well put together, and there's some nice design details here and there. All right, so let's talk about these seats. They're decent, about what you might expect at this price point. They're a little bit hard, but they're acceptable. You got this two-tone thing going on with this red racing stripe right here. And this being the base model, they are of course cloth and they are manually adjusted. There's no power seats on this trim, but I can get the seat to go plenty far back, so I have plenty of legroom. Though we do have a good amount of legroom from side to side, my knee doesn't ever really hit the center console, which is really nice. And that's been a problem for me on much larger SUVs. And if I put this all the way down to the floor, I have plenty of headroom. Well, not plenty. I mean, it's just enough. I think I've got maybe like an inch between my head and the roof. So I'm 6'3", and this is decent for me and not too cramped in here, but we should keep in mind that this actually has less legroom and less headroom than the previous generation Prius. In the front here, almost an inch and a half less headroom and almost an inch less legroom. I drive my wife's 2016 Prius quite frequently, and I don't really notice that much of a difference here, although one of the big differences is that this roofline right here seems very low and the windows seem a lot smaller. All right, so next we have to talk about this area right here, the steering wheel and that gauge pod that's sitting out way back over there. So if I take this steering wheel and put it all the way up, as you can see, it completely blocks my view of the gauges. So as someone that's somewhat tall, I have to move the steering wheel all the way down to its lowest position to be able to see those gauges. It doesn't touch my knees, but it kind of feels like the steering wheel is in my lap, which is a little bit hard to get used to. So I do wish that that gauge cluster out there was maybe just a little bit higher, or maybe just kind of off to the side like it used to be on the older Prius. Thankfully, in the week that I've had this car, I've gotten used to this steering wheel position and it's not so bad. The steering wheel does have a whole lot of buttons on it, but it's all stuff that you'll probably use regularly. And check this out. It is actually heated in this base model, which is cool. So when it comes to the graphics on this digital gauge pod, they're clean and easy to read. Though I have to say, I kind of like the graphics on the previous gen Prius a little bit better. They were maybe a little bit prettier and slightly easier to read, but this works. And as you might expect, there's a couple different views here. It shows you all the information you might want to see. All right, moving on to the infotainment system. As you can see here in this base model, we do have the smaller 8-inch screen here. You can get a 12.3-inch display with the top trim, but this is perfectly adequate. And we do have Toyota's newer software here, so the graphics are decent. It's very responsive, and it does actually have navigation, which is pretty nice for a base model. And of course, you also get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and bonus, this can be done wirelessly, which is pretty cool. All right, moving on to this HVAC system, which is surrounded by that cool copper color here. And I do really appreciate that we have physical controls here. Thank you, Toyota. Everything's very easy to use at a quick glance. You can even use it without taking your eyes off the road. Very simple, I love it. Down here, 2 USB-C ports. And I'm guessing right down here is where on a higher end trim they would have the wireless charger, but you have this kind of strange little tray that comes out. So you can hide stuff under there if you want. It's like a little hidden tray. That's pretty neat. But this space could be useful to throw your phone or your keys or a singamajig. And speaking of singamajigs, these relatively small cup holders do hold one each. That's good to know. Down here, I like the fact that the shifter is very small and these buttons don't take up a whole lot of space. Kind of leaves this nice compartment over here for your phone. And then back here, as you might expect, the center console is not that large, but it does have a couple more USB-C charging ports, which is nice. The gear selector is very similar to previous Priuses. You got your drive mode selector right here, which allows you to select between custom, sport, normal, and eco. This switches between hybrid and EV mode, and if you press and hold it, it can activate a charging mode. This right here allows you to select the auto mode, which will let the car decide when you should be in EV mode and when you shouldn't. All right, let's check out the back seat. Almost forgot to mention these weird door handles. There's a button inside here that actually electronically pops the door open. And right down here, there's a backup that will manually do it. This is all sort of overly complicated just so they can have no door handle on this design here, but pretty odd, but it works. Okay, so you don't really want to be over 6 feet tall and sitting in the back of a Prius. It will work in a pinch, but I definitely wouldn't want to take a long road trip in this car. I especially wouldn't want to sit 3 people back here. We've sat 3 in the back of my wife's Prius, and that was pushing it, but the back seat of this one, once again, is a little bit smaller than the previous gen, almost an inch less rear headroom compared to the last gen Prius Prime. Though we do actually have an inch more legroom. So in general, yes, it does just feel more tight right around here. I guess that's how this Prius can have that cool looking roofline, but it definitely compromises rear seat comfort back here. Though rear seat space has never really been a Prius strong suit. Now, if you do want to fit a rear facing car seat in here, you'll have to move those front seats forward to get it to fit. Now with a front facing booster seat like this one, this also just barely fits. It's almost touching the ceiling, and I did have to remove that rear headrest. But the good news is that these latch anchors are very easy to get to. So there's no vents back here, but you do get 2 USB-C ports and one 120 volt outlet. So moving on to cargo space, you can get a power liftgate with higher trims, but here it's manual, and I think that's fine. Once inside, you'll see that the Prime offers slightly less cargo room than the non-plug-in Prius, but it's still decent for this class of vehicle, and it's a bit more than we got with the last generation Prius Prime. We get 20.3 cubic feet of space behind the seats, and of course, being a hatchback means that it is a bit more flexible than a sedan when it comes to making stuff fit. So when you fold those rear seats down, we get 26.7 cubic feet of space. Now, in terms of safety, Toyota provides their Safety Sense 3.0 system, and that gives you blind spot monitoring with rear cross traffic alert, front cross traffic alert, safe exit access, lane change assist, and adaptive cruise control. Front and rear parking assist is an option, but get this, it's only $35 for that option. I don't think I've ever seen an option that cheap. The parking sensors work well, and it gives you feedback here on the screen when you're nearing an object or a person. Now, this being a small hatchback, we have a much lower hood, meaning it's significantly safer for pedestrians and people outside of the car. And having a low and short hood means it will be far easier to see if there's someone or something in front of the vehicle, which absolutely cannot be said for many new SUVs and crossovers for sale today. In terms of outward visibility, we're still doing better than a lot of new SUVs. I do like the fact that they have this piece of glass right here, but these extremely long and raked A-pillars kind of give you a blind spot in a place that you might not normally expect. Though I'm sure if you drive this car for a while, you'll probably get used to that. Visibility out the sides is pretty good, but if you've driven a previous generation Prius like I have, you'll realize that these windows are a fair amount smaller. But this being a very small car, it's still pretty easy to tell where the front of your car is. Visibility out the back has never been a Prius strong suit, but it's a little bit better than the last gen, I'd say. The backup camera here is decent, and a 360 camera is available on the top trim. And in terms of safety in the case of a crash, the Prius Prime does extremely well. It received a top safety pick from IIHS. Okay, enough talking about all these safety features. Let's take this for a drive. So if you've ever driven an older Prius, you're well aware that they're not quick vehicles. My wife's 2016 Prius gets to 60 miles per hour in 11.5 seconds, and even the last Prius Prime took 10 seconds. That's not super confidence inspiring when you want to get onto a freeway quickly. However, the torque of the electric motor at lower speeds made it more than acceptable around town. This new Prius Prime aims to challenge your expectations of what a Prius is, both in terms of exterior design, efficiency, and performance. Under the hood is a 2-liter engine that makes 150 horsepower on its own, but it's paired with an electric motor good for 161 horsepower. When you combine the two, somehow the math works out to 220 horsepower total, powering those front wheels. And that's a huge jump over the last generation Prius Prime, which only had 121 total. So 99 more horsepower here. 0 to 60 miles per hour occurs in about 6.6 seconds, which is downright quick for a vehicle that's supposed to be all about efficiency. Back in the 80s, that would have been like Mustang GT levels of speed and power. So yeah, this is a pretty quick Prius. It's not a sports car, but it can get you up to speed on the freeway without any issues, no problem passing cars or anything like that. But most of the time, you'll probably remember that this is a Prius, and the whole point here is to save fuel, right? Compared to the last Prius Prime, which could do 25 miles on EV power, this new one can go a lot further. This base SE is the most efficient of this new Prime lineup, and it goes 44 miles on electric power alone. Fuel efficiency is pretty great as well. It's rated at 52 miles per gallon on gas only, 127 mpge when you use gas and electric combined, though that is slightly down from the 133 of the last generation Prius Prime. But if you can regularly take advantage of those 44 miles of EV range, you may not have to dip into that gas tank as often as the last gen. So I've been driving around for the last week almost entirely on EV power alone. Most of my trips have been a few miles here and there, so I've pretty much just left it in EV mode. And when I'm home, I plug it in and it gets charged up when I'm not using it. We've got a standard 120 volt charging cable included here that can top up the battery in 11 hours. And if you've got a 240 volt outlet or you're using a public charger, it can do it in about 4 hours. Now that is pretty slow, but if you can prioritize your charging so that it's primarily at home overnight, it won't be that much of an issue, I don't think. But if you find yourself out and about and you want to just top up the battery somewhere, you might be less likely to do it because it's not that quick. Now, most of my time with this vehicle, I've been driving around in EV mode, which, as you would guess, just uses the electric motor and the battery. Press here and you can enter hybrid mode. And as you might guess, that just uses the gasoline motor. Now, it also has this auto mode, which automatically selects EV or hybrid depending on the situation. And now that I'm finally using this auto mode, I've actually finally burned just a tiny bit of fuel. But after driving like 150 miles, I still have nearly a full tank of gas. And that's the ridiculously cool benefit of this car. If your driving habits are like that of the average American, fewer than 40 miles per day and mostly short trips, you could conceivably drive this car for weeks without ever using a drop of fuel. We also really need to talk about the efficiency here. When using electric power alone, I've averaged 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour, significantly better than any full-on EV that I've tested. All right, so in terms of ride, it's very comfortable and compliant over bumps. When it's just the electric motor running, it's pretty quiet in here, though depending on some surfaces, the tire noise can be a bit loud. And on a winding back road without a lot of traffic around, I dare say that it's actually a bit fun to drive. Slap on a set of performance tires, and I bet this Prius could be pretty quick around a racetrack. Probably could even keep up with some new sporty compact cars. I think this is actually faster in a straight line than the Civic Si. Maybe I should let Toyota convince me to take one of these to the racetrack. Okay, so let's talk price. This base model Prius Prime SE with a few small options like floor mats comes in at just over 34 grand. To me, that seems like a fantastic price for a vehicle that could potentially save you over $6,000 in fuel costs over 5 years of ownership, and even more if you prioritize EV driving over all else. It's also significantly less expensive than the average new car price of about 50 grand. In terms of competition, I think the closest you might get is the Kia Niro plug-in hybrid, which I reviewed. Click above to watch that one. It has a fair amount more rear headroom, but surprisingly a bit less cargo area unless you fold down those rear seats. It's also a bit more expensive and has quite a bit less EV range. Or you could bump up in size to something like the Toyota RAV4 Prime, but you'll be paying quite a bit more and maybe you don't need all that extra space. And plus you'll lose the cool Prius styling. Never thought I'd ever say that. So actually, this base model Prius Prime is one of my favorite cars that I've driven this year, for real. Yeah, it's a bit tight on the inside for a tall person, and I'm not a huge fan of the gauges that can get hidden behind the steering wheel, but there are some concessions that I'd be willing to make to have this much EV range at this price. And bonus that it looks a lot nicer too. Okay, that's it for today. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you can get notified of all my new videos. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider buying a Hello Road t-shirt or hat at helloroad.tv/shop. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.